I'm Benjamin Hall, and I'm searching for heroes. Thank you for joining us today, everybody. We've got a remarkable guest today, somebody called Colin Campbell. He's written a book called Finding the Words, and in that he discusses his own voyage through grief. About 5 years ago, Colin and his wife were driving their car to the Joshua Tree, and they were T-boned by a drunk and high driver going 90 miles an hour. Ruby and Hart were killed in the back seat. And in his book, Colin lays out his grief, how he interacted with the community, and what helped him to move forward and what helped him to explain to others how he was feeling. It's a pleasure having him on. It's a very difficult experience he's been through, but he's incredibly open about talking about it. So thank you for joining us this week. And here's Colin. Everything that you write about, I feel so much of it. And I don't know if you know, but I was in an attack in Ukraine, and, I lost our colleagues and I was injured. And I think I'm still in this middle section where the way people react to me when they see me with prosthetics and the way I react to them, I'm still trying to figure out to make them feel comfortable. And I know we went through very different things, you and I, totally different, but people still react to you in a different way. And I find that so interesting.
Yeah, I've come to a place where I feel like I'm less worried about taking care of other people, not in a mean way, but in like what am I shielding them from? Reality, like bad things happen to good people, and it's okay. They can take it. That's my attitude, because I talk to a lot of other grieving parents, and they worry like, I don't want to mention that I have dead kids because how upsetting would it be for them? I kind of feel like it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll start off talking about your book. And
okay, terrific.
In the title itself, I think, lays the tone for it, Finding the Words. And this is the real journey that you went through, not only finding your words, but helping other people find their words and speaking to you. So it worked in both directions.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that it's hard, especially in early grief, to find the words to express what we need. We don't even know what we need in early grief, right? It's just it's so traumatic, it's so chaotic that it takes a while to figure out, what do I need?
Yeah. When you wrote the book, were you still had you figured out at that point how to speak to other people and how to come to terms with your own grief? Is there ever an answer to it, or are you constantly evolving?
Yeah. I think as I wrote the book, it was definitely evolving. I started writing it pretty soon after the crash. It hadn't even been a full year before I started the process of writing it. And definitely the act of writing it helped me find the words, as you said, to literally process what was going on with me, and where I was and how I felt about it. Yeah. So it definitely has a raw quality to it.
Yeah. When I wrote my own book, I wrote it in hospital, and I was thinking all the time that it became part of the therapy for me, because it was trying to figure out how I was feeling, how different life would become. And writing that down, I think, got me through quite a lot of the hurdles as well. What were you most surprised at? Soon after your children died, in the way people reacted to you.
Well, the most surprising thing for me, just to begin with, was the fear, was how scared I was, and I still am scared at the thought of living without Ruby and Hart, my children. So that was the most surprising, I think, to me. Just how terrified I was to even come home to my own home without them in it. In terms of surprising, in terms of people responding to me, I think it was the idea that I was suddenly scary to them, that they were scared to say anything because they were so scared to hurt me more. That they wouldn't even say hello. They wouldn't say hi because it seemed like maybe I might be like, hi, how dare you say hi to me? My children were just killed. And so that, I guess my fear and then their fear were the most surprising to me.
And so I suppose you must have felt that you had two options. You write about this. One is to cut yourself off from everyone, to go through your own grief by yourself. And then what you write about is how, in fact, sharing it with others was great help to you as well.
Yeah. And it really felt like that actually was grieving. That process of talking about Ruby and Hart and talking about my feelings, my grief, that was literally how I was grieving. And I felt kind of stuck when it was just me. It was just me ruminating. That was really an eye-opener for me. The idea that we mourn in community.
You've also talked about how you found yourself soon after their deaths looking away from their pictures. But that was the moment that you decided that to remember them, you needed to look at them. You needed to feel everything. You couldn't hide from it. Yeah.
That was like an epiphany for me, a real realization that it was early in the morning. I came down the stairs and I had these big blown up images of Ruby and Hart, and I taped them to the wall of my living room. So the whole living room became like this shrine, and there were 8 2x3-foot photographs of Ruby and Hart's faces, and I wanted them. I wanted them there, and I wanted to be surrounded by them. But then one morning, it was quote unquote too painful. It hurt too much to look at them, and I looked away. And in that moment, I was like, what am I doing? How can I look away from my own children's faces because I'm so scared of the pain that it's going to cause me? And that's when I really thought, like, I don't want to ever look away from my kids' photos. To this day, it's hard. It's hard for me to look at their photos, to be honest. But I always do it. And in the end, it's always worth it. Yeah. I love looking at their photos.
Yeah. Could you tell us a little bit about each of them?
Yeah. I'm looking at pictures of them right now, actually. So I'm looking at a photo of Hart when he was very young, unbelievably beautiful little boy, and a beautiful young man he grew into. He was a very, very handsome guy, and such a little devilish grin on his face. He was like this amazing clown. He was an entertainer. He was going to be an actor, for sure. He loved it. He loved putting on personas and playing characters and making everybody laugh. He was literally the life of the party. He was a real homebody too, though. So he'd always say like, oh, I don't want to go to the party. I want to stay home. And then he'd be the one that had the most fun every time. Wherever we went, he would always have the most fun. He was like a magnet to other kids. And Ruby was this extraordinary artist. She was an amazing painter, graphic designer. She even did her own animated short film. So she died when she was 17 and he was 14. But she was going to go off to be an artist. She got a merit scholarship to the Chicago Institute for the Art, or Art Institute. I forget how you say the name of that institute in Chicago, but to study over the summer of her junior year in high school. And so I think she was going to go there for college. But she was really a warrior for social justice. She was gay and very proud and out, and a protector of other people who were being bullied, which is really beautiful.
Do you now try to carry that on? Are you involved in projects that she would be proud of you doing so?
Yeah, I am, and I do. So we started a foundation, the Ruby and Hart Foundation, and that gives money to authors to go into schools, underserved schools, and give away free books, and have authors visit schools, because both Ruby and Hart loved books. Yeah.
Could you try and explain, I suppose, to our listeners what your grief felt like at first, like how it affected you?
Yeah. At first it was a lot of disbelief, and this disbelief still continues to this day. It's still hard for me to believe that they're gone, because they were here and laughing and having a wonderful time, and then the next moment they're gone, and that's hard.
Do you feel that sort of every morning when you wake up? Do you sort of remember that for the first time in the day?
Yeah, I do. In the early years, it would literally be my first thought waking up and my last thought going to bed. And now it's not always the first thought when I wake up, but it's definitely every morning and every night. Absolutely. And that's I think part of the process of accepting it, that it's real, that this life that I'm living is real. It's not the life I would have chosen for myself, but it's what I've got, and I want to make the most of it in honor of Ruby and Hart.
Yeah,
make them proud.
I think your book does that, absolutely. And I know how proud they would be of it. People would come up to you and say at the beginning, oh, there are no words to describe this. And that is something that you look at quite often in your book. Can you talk about how you feel about that?
Yeah, I do. I will. It was astounding how many times I heard that phrase, there are no words. It was bizarre. That was really surprising. That was one of the most surprising things, I guess, in early grief, was that everybody knew to say that. It was like, who told you to say that? Everybody else is saying that. What a strange thing. And at first I thought, when I first heard it the first, 10 or 20 times, I was like, yeah, right, there are no words. This is insane. But by the 100th time, I was like, hold on a second. Wait a minute. Maybe there are words. Let's think about this for a minute. And I started to feel like that was sort of indicative of how our whole society deals with grief. We don't talk about it. We say it's too big. There's no words for it. I can't talk about it. Let's leave it at that. And very often that phrase, there are no words, would be a conversation killer, because it's literally saying we can't talk about this, right? There are no words. So of course it's coming from a place of love. I'm not foolish. I understand people are trying to express love and support for me, and I appreciated that. I don't want to imply that I'm rude or something. I get where it's coming from, but ultimately I found it unsatisfactory, and I really wanted to have the words to talk about grief. Hence my book, Finding the Words, right? So yeah, I began to feel like, let's do better than that. It's okay if you say there are no words, and then you keep talking to me. That's great. But if you say there are no words and then that's it, that's not good enough. I want us to find the words to talk.
I just wonder, and you are a director, plays, films, and what do you think? Where does that come from? Many people's inability to talk like that. Isn't it in culture? Hasn't it always been there? If you look back at Shakespeare, for example, you go that far, people would talk, were open about those things. And has that changed? Has culture changed? Why are people finding it difficult to talk now?
Yeah, I think it has changed. I think that over time, our relationship to death has changed because of, the hospitals have taken a lot of death out of the public view. People become sick and they go away. And I think it's wonderful that we have hospitals. Don't get me wrong, but I feel like that impulse now is a very modern impulse to not want to talk about our feelings about death and loss and grief. In the olden days, people would wear black, right, for a year or for the rest of their lives, and so publicly declaring, I'm in grief, I'm in mourning. And now there's I think a desire to hide that, or to tell people to get over it, stop grieving, get over it.
I think there's something about age as well that plays a role in it, because I have prosthetic legs, but I go to pick up my children at school, and every kid surrounds you and talks and asks and wants to know more, but none of the parents will do that. And I find that fascinating, and I'm not sure at what age they stop doing that. But you must have had different experiences talking both to children versus to adults.
Well, that's interesting you said that, because that's I really learned a very valuable lesson very early on, because one of Hart's friends was the first person who reached out to us. It was like day 2 or something after the crash, but reached out to us, and I was like, oh, this is what I want to receive, because I didn't even know what I wanted to hear, right? I was hearing there are no words, and okay. But then I got an email from this young boy who just said, like, I love Hart so much. He was so amazing. In the email, he shared a story about Hart, and then he said he'll miss him and think about him for the rest of his life. And it's like, oh, right. That's what we want to hear. We want to hear stories about the people we lost and how much they're still thought about and loved. And that was really true across the board. No kid ever said there are no words to me. It was only adults. So to your point about what age it is, I don't know, but it's older than 17 because that's Ruby's friend's age. So some point above age 17 is when we all learn to say there are no words. But no kids ever said that to me, and they all engaged in my grief with me by just asking questions, just like you said.
And I suppose that's so important in your book. It's about people engaging in your grief with you. Is that people who want to go through it with you, who you think should be sharing your grief? Does it go that far, or do you just want them to understand your grief?
Yeah, I'd love for us to be able to have a conversation and talk about it, so it's not like a white elephant in the room. Because that's when it becomes really awkward. That's when it becomes like we're having a fake conversation because we're not really talking about the real thing that's happening in the room. And I liken it to like imagine if I had a spear, right? And someone threw a spear into my chest and it's sticking out and there's blood spattering all over the place. And imagine I went to a party and nobody asked me about the spear and the blood. That would be bizarre, right? And yet, especially in early acute grief, it's like having a spear in your heart. You're bleeding all over. And it feels so strange to have nobody talk about it. I imagine that was similar with you and your foot. Like, it'd be weird if nobody mentioned it, right?
Oh, and sometimes people don't want to look at it either, my prosthetics. And you sort of see them looking upwards and talking about something else. And so I have a line where I always say something to them. I will always say a line early on about them. And as soon as you do, you see them lift. You see it's so much easier for them to talk about it. But sometimes you just need to encourage them a little bit because others, don't really know how to. Was it different between people you knew very well versus people you didn't know that? Like, were close friends? Did you find they talked more openly with you, or would even some of them find it hard?
Some did, yes, absolutely. I think some just know how to be more at ease with it, and some people didn't. Even close friends didn't know. But I developed this, I call it my grief spiel, which is basically I would tell them one-on-one, I'd say, here's the deal. Like, I need to talk about Ruby and Hart. I need to talk about my grief. We can talk about something else for like 5 minutes, but then we got to circle back to my grief. And please say Ruby and Hart's names. And it's okay. You can't upset me by talking about crashes or children or your own children because I'm already upset. You're not going to make me more upset. Don't worry about it. And that was really helpful to them. I could see they were like, palpably relieved, like, oh, thank goodness. Thank you for telling me that. To your point about like just talking, let's talk about it. And then we can talk about something else. Like, it doesn't have to all be about my grief. Certainly not now. But it helps our relationship if we can acknowledge it, Yeah.
More of our conversation right after this. Did you go through different phases of grief? So at one point, did you want everybody to be feeling your grief and sharing? And then did you ever start to feel you didn't want it to weigh on other people? And so did you ever want to keep it to yourself?
No. I did it in the sense of like, I don't think it's weighing on people when we talk about it, because hopefully, or actually invariably, it would go to happy places, talking about Ruby and Hart and our memories. So it wasn't like a heavy, burdensome thing. It was kind of light quickly. It was like, let's say a hilarious story about Ruby and Hart, and we can cry a little, but then also we can laugh. So it didn't feel, I think my friends and family were and are still grieving Ruby and Hart. And so they're in pain, right? And so by us being able to talk about that, I think it lightens both of our lives.
I suppose you talk about telling stories about them and how sort of maybe you can feel joy from doing that. But I wonder what the
Mm.
relationship is between grief and joy. And
Mm.
do you feel bad sometimes feeling happy about things? Do you think I'm grieving? I should, in fact, I shouldn't be happy right now. It's a
Yes.
funny relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I never feel bad about feeling joy thinking about Ruby and Hart,
Yes.
but I do feel guilty when I'm enjoying my life in other areas, right? That's hard. And I think about it a lot, and I write about it, guilt. And I've come to believe it's part of grief. It's like you have to learn to live with it and try and be kind to yourself. Ruby and Hart would love for me to be, enjoying my ice cream cone or sing a song happily, because they love me. So it doesn't help to punish myself, even though those punishing thoughts happen all the time. Absolutely.
Yeah. How do you feel sort of now at the moment? Do you talk about your children a lot? You do many interviews, of course.
Yeah.
Do you ever think that you come out the other side of grief? Do you think that there is a point at which you start morphing or looking forward? I don't know how that over time that changes.
Yeah. I don't know completely either. We're coming up on the 5th anniversary of the crash in a few months. So anniversaries are still hard. Birthdays are still hard. Holidays are hard. But a lot of days I feel pretty good. I feel pretty happy. And I'm able to find joy and feel joy. I think that I'm assuming there will always be aching in my heart for Ruby and Hart. Even 30 years from now, I think I'll be aching and missing them. But I think also by allowing myself to think about them and talk about them so much, I think that I'm able to be present in this life and enjoy this life as much as I can.
Yeah. I know that the Jewish community helped you a lot get through this, but it's interesting because you grew up as an atheist, atheist, and then you married a Jewish woman. But when the crash happened, you weren't practicing as a Jew, is that right? But you really moved into it.
Yeah. I mean, I was an active member of our temple, and Hart and Ruby were bar and bat mitzvahed, but I'm still an atheist. I'm not Jewish, so I describe myself as Jewish adjacent. So we did all the holidays, and we celebrate Shabbat and light candles, but it was more I was like an ally, accompanying my wife and kids on this Jewish path. I valued the sermons of my rabbi, Sharon Brous. That's why we chose the temple we chose, because I find her sermons so inspirational. And then when Ruby and Hart were killed, that community really stepped up and helped us through our grief. And then the Jewish traditions opened my eyes to what grieving is. Part of the reason why I understood how valuable it was to grieve in community was because that was what I got from the Jewish traditions. So we sat Shiva for the first 7 nights after the funeral. People come to our house and they sit with you. And our rabbi, Sharon Brous, she turned to us and said, "Do you want to talk to anyone? Do you want to say anything to these people?" And Gail and I found that we did. We wanted to talk about Ruby and Hart and our grief. And then they wanted to talk about Ruby and Hart too. And so it was like, wow, this is amazing. This is what it means to grieve in community.
Do you think that there is more? I mean, that's a really interesting community that do that. I mean, I'm a Catholic, and we don't sort of think of death in that same way. I don't think we come together in the same way that Judaism does. And I think it seems like a really strong part of the community to do so. And I don't know. I mean, I wonder why the difference.
I think that a lot of the traditions that just say that you mourn for one day and there's no more structure after that. Obviously, the Catholic tradition, they assume you're going to mourn for more than one day, right?
Yes.
But they only have that one day built in, the funeral and the wake, And like, I think it's wonderful to acknowledge that, that it takes a lot more time and give people in grief more support, especially in the beginning. The other beautiful thing about the Jewish tradition of grieving is that there's a mourner's prayer, the mourner's kaddish, and you have to say it, right? But you're only allowed to say it unless there are 9 other people with you. Isn't that amazing? You have to be in community when you say this prayer, but you have to say the prayer. And so it's such a beautiful acknowledgement that grief should be shared and not something that's tucked away in a corner. And you should have support. You should have people around you as you're saying the mourner's prayer and weeping.
I suppose if you weren't religious, would grief groups help in the same way? Like, did you find other avenues outside Judaism that helped you?
Yeah. And again, I'm not religious. I'm still an atheist, but I'm also a member of our synagogue. Absolutely. And yes, I went to a lot of grief groups, and they were extremely helpful to me. I think that's very valuable because it's extra helpful to talk to people who are in the same boat as you are. So I went to Compassionate Friends a number of times, and Compassionate Friends is for grieving parents, grandparents, and siblings. It's a national organization. It's got meetings all over the country in every city, and that was really helpful. And I went to Our House, which is a grief place out here in Los Angeles, and we were in a grief group with people who had lost adult children, and all of us had lost our children suddenly. So we had a lot in common. They're different deaths, but and we also lost our children in a similar time frame. So we were in a similar place on our grief journey in Our House, and that was a really amazing model. We stayed together for 2 years and remain friends to this day. That was very powerful.
Did you find that sort of everyone that you spoke to in that group had very different ways of dealing with it, or did you see real similarities?
I both. I saw people had different ways of dealing with it, but there were so many commonalities, and the strongest one was that people really wanted to talk about their grief and their loved one to other people. And a lot of people struggle with the fact that their friends and family were reluctant to talk to them. And that's partly, again, why I was inspired to write my book. Because it's so easy, I think it's so easy to turn bitter and be isolated in grief. Because that's sort of almost the natural inclination. Like in early grief, you feel like you want to be left alone. Like, leave me alone. I'm being overwhelmed right now. And then I think your friends think to themselves, oh, they want to be left alone forever. I guess I'll just back off, right? And I don't really want to talk to them anyway because I'm kind of scared.
Did some of your friends do that? Did some of your friends just cut off and move away?
Well, they didn't really. I could feel it happening, but then I really reached out and shared my grief needs with them. And so that was really helpful to me. Yeah, I was very aggressive.
But that's what I was going to say. Is your advice then you have to be proactive? If you don't help guide other people, right, you may well lose them because maybe they don't know how to cope with it either.
Yeah, I think absolutely. That's a real thrust of my book is that, look, we have to educate our community about our own grief needs. And because they're individual, what do you need in your grief is different from what I needed, right? And it changes day to day. And I think it's hard, but I think it really helps us if we are advocating for ourselves, if we are teaching people what we need because they don't know. And I certainly didn't know. So the thing that really helped me be compassionate to my friends and families because I was a bad friend in grief before this. I didn't know what to say. I would definitely back away from other people's pain and grief. I was scared for sure. So I have tremendous empathy for people who don't know what to say to me because I wouldn't know what to say to me either. Yeah.
So, I mean, there are so many things in your book, but if you had to bubble it down, you had to give advice to someone who, well, for both sides. First of all, for someone who has gone through the loss, of that scale. And then for the person who knows someone who's gone through that loss, how would you advise them?
Yeah. Well, if I had to boil it down, I would say lean into the discomfort because it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to tell your friends what you need in grief. It's uncomfortable to talk about grief. It's uncomfortable to acknowledge mortality and loss. But that's in the short run. I think in the short run, it's uncomfortable. And in the long run, it's so much better. It's so much more full life for everybody. Because we're all going to lose our loved ones, right? That's the human condition. And
we are, but but children is, I suppose, different to losing parents or even perhaps siblings. I mean, I'd say that is very different.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. It sure is extra awful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you ever? I sometimes think back to the attack itself, and when I was lying there and I was injured, and I find it gives me some strength. It puts things in perspective. And if I'm struggling, at the moment, then I go back to there and I feel good. I feel pretty strong again. But do you ever go back? Do you ever try and remember that day or how it felt? Does it give you anything?
Well, it definitely does not give me strength. I do not go there. I do not go there for any strength gaining. I gain strength from thinking about the love we created, me, my wife, and Ruby and Hart. That gives me strength. Thinking about how powerful we were as a foursome, as a family, so much love we had, and still have. That helps me. I went back to the crash very early on. It was almost like the next day, and I wrote down every memory I had of it, the whole day leading up to the crash and the crash itself, and then after the crash, because I wanted to have it written down so I wouldn't be stuck there. I wouldn't like ruminate and think over and over again. And of course, I still do. Every time I get behind the wheel of a car, every time I am driving, especially at night, I think about the crash. But I don't like dwelling there because it's a pretty dark place. It's pretty full of despair. So I try to allow myself to think about it and then allow myself to let it go as easily as I can. Yeah. Yep.
You're listening to Searching for Heroes with Benjamin Hall. We'll be right back. What do you think do you have any thoughts of the killer and how you feel concerned?
She was charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder, but then through a plea deal, it was whatever the next step down is. I forget what it is now. Aggravated vehicular manslaughter under intoxication, something like that. I don't know. She was just sentenced to 14 years and 8 months in prison. I have complicated feelings about her. I try not to think about her too much. I think that's another place that's dark for me, that it doesn't feel good. I don't know. I have a complicated relationship to our justice system and prisons as well. I don't know how rehabilitating they are. But hopefully I have hopes. I hope that her life turns around. She was a repeat DUI offender. So she'd had her license revoked, and she had a warrant out for her arrest at the time of the crash because she was violating her probation of a previous DUI. So it's not like this was a first-time offense for her. So that's hard, right? To think about that. But I hope that she turns her life around and helps other people and saves lives. That's what I'm hoping.
Yeah. Would you say you are a different person today? Like, in what ways this changed you, and like how different you are to how you were before?
Yeah. I think I'm not scared of other people's pain in the way that I was. I feel I have a lot more empathy. I wasn't like an unempathetic person to begin with. I was a nice guy for sure, but I didn't have deep understanding of this level of pain. and now I know what it feels like to be in pain, deeply in pain for years. So I think I'm more empathetic.
Yeah. How do you feel about sort of public displays of grief? I mean, do you
Mm.
find that that happened often? Were you crying, for example? Is
Yeah,
that some?
I cry. I cried a lot every day for the first year or two, and every other day from then on in. I don't know. I don't really keep track of it, but often I cry. But I don't cry in public that often. But I kind of wish I did. I think I'm still a little uncomfortable with that as a guy, maybe. But I do now and again. Yeah, yep. I've wept in airports and movie theaters and um but uh but yeah, it's still a little uncomfortable with it. So
You
mostly I weep alone.
you seem to have developed a strength, though, and I keep thinking this. I mean, that you
Mm-hmm.
seem strong, and I wondered if
Mm-hmm.
you were like that before, and
Uh,
if that's something you've learned.
I guess I must have been strong before, but not in the same way, maybe. Uh, so I think crying in public is strong. I think that's a strength. I wish I was stronger even, but in that regard. But yeah, I do feel strong. I do feel emotionally strong. I'm not sure. I think it comes from Ruby and Hart, honestly.
Has your view of the world and how good and bad are balanced, has that
Mm.
changed?
Mm. Yeah, I guess my eyes are open to how difficult life can be. I think I lived a pretty charmed life before the crash. Things came pretty easily, and I had a pretty great life, and I was happy. I love Ruby and Hart and my wife, so that's really nice. Very lucky, and now I have a different relationship to luck. I don't believe it anymore.
Hmm.
Yeah, I don't even like saying like fingers crossed or I
Yeah.
don't like that.
If someone was reading your book, what is the one
Mm.
message that you would like to convey to them, that you'd like them to pick up?
Oh, well, um, I think another message that I really love is the idea of choosing love. That it's painful, but I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. So I'm in immense pain having lost Ruby and Hart, but if I would do it all over again, I wouldn't not want to have Ruby and Hart. I would, you know what I mean? And so my wife and I, we are currently fostering to adopt two teenagers, and it's difficult, opening our hearts. And it's difficult for them to open their hearts because they have been through an immense amount of trauma, right? Anybody in the foster system has endured incredible trauma and from an early age, which is heartbreaking. But and it's also scary. It's a scary process emotionally.
You must be in a better place to be able to talk with the foster children. I mean, you must have now learned, and so that you must find
Yeah.
that well. You must be not feel bad about going up and speaking very openly one to one. That must be a real positive.
Yeah, I think it does help. I think it helps that and when we talk about our grief to them, and yeah, we're very open about trauma and loss, and it does. I think it does help to be able to say that I can talk about trauma and I'm comfortable with that. Do you find that to be true of you too?
Um, yes, no, but I'm still going through phases, I suppose, and there are times when I really want to talk about it. And when I was in hospital, I decided that if ever I was having something was really difficult or tricky, or I missed Pierre, who passed away, or I
Mm.
didn't know how the world would look at me, I would tell the first person I saw, the first person who walked in the door. I made a pact with myself to just say it to them. And boy, I never did that before. I kept everything inside, and it
Mm.
helped so much. And you just say it to somebody, say, "Hey, this is tricky right now. I'm finding it difficult." And I found it lifted a lot of weight. So I try. That's something I never did before. That's
Nice.
something I continue trying to do now. whenever things feel tricky. So yeah, I learned in that sense.
Yeah.
Colin, I want to say thank you so much for joining me today. I really
Oh,
appreciate your time, and
yeah.
your book, I think, sends amazing messages to people who are going through something difficult, and who are also for people who know someone going through something difficult. So I hope everyone picks it up and reads it, because we need more of that in community. We really do.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Not at all. Take care, Colin.
You too.
Well, I think it was really interesting speaking to Colin right there, and I think that we share many things in common, but of course, the tragedy we both went through are incredibly different. I feel that I was injured, but I'm up, I'm walking, I can see a path forward, and I have to say that I think that the death of one's children, that is something that I think, obviously, as Colin said, that stays with you forever, and so I think grief there is different to perhaps any others. But the way in which he learned to interact with people and the way people interacted with him, in that I find a lot of similarities to my experience. The amount of people I've spoken to who don't know how to talk to you, they are afraid of upsetting you. He has felt the same. And I think both of us have done the same, which is that we end up having to talk to people. We have to tell them not to be afraid. We have to guide them. And you just have to hope that all of one's community can do that, can lead to that. But someone's relationship with grief, I think, is very personal as well. And I think Colin was really open with us about how personal it was to him and how he's still feeling it, but that it changes in many ways. But I think more than anything else, the message, and if I was going to connect it to our other podcasts, it is, if things are feeling really difficult, don't give up. Don't cut yourself off. As hard as it might be, reach out to the community, be open about how you're feeling, and that will help you get forward. And I think Colin described that. That's what got him through. And I think that helped me get through as well. So again, if you're feeling something difficult, go and tell someone, go and talk to someone. Or if you know someone who's going through something difficult, go and talk to them. Just send them a message, go and speak to them, because it helps. And again, I think community is something that will get us through almost anything. So thank you very much for listening. I really appreciate it. And we'll speak to you next week. Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcasts Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts. And Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.